Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar entitled Transforming Copper Exploration. I'm your host, Brien Lundin, CEO of the New Orleans Investment Conference and publisher of Gold Newsletter. Today, I'm joined by Kodiak Copper's President and CEO, Claudia Tornquist, and Inflection Resources President and CEO, Alistair Waddell. We're excited to dive into the world of copper, where we will discuss its importance, innovations in exploration techniques, and the current state of investments into copper exploration. As you'll see, the two companies featured today were well chosen. They are both exploring for very large copper deposits, the kind that the major mining companies lust after, and the kind that will be necessary in this new age of electrification that we are entering. We're going to explore those fundamental supply-demand basics that are driving the copper price. I'm going to talk about why I think copper price is headed much higher. And we're going to see why these two companies are particularly well situated to find those next very large copper deposits. So before we get started into some of these questions and analyzing the copper market today, I'd like to introduce each of the CEOs that are joining us today and their companies. Alistair will talk about Inflection Resources, which is an exploration company focused on the discovery of truly massive copper gold deposits in Eastern Australia. The company has a highly accomplished team of exploration geologists and capital market experts with extensive global experience and track records of making big discoveries. The company has an extensive portfolio of 100% owned projects in New South Wales, a mining-friendly jurisdiction home to numerous world-class copper and gold deposits, including Newmont's flagship Kodiak deposit, which is Australia's biggest gold mine. Inflection has a rich multi-year exploration partnership with AngloGold and is actively drilling many large copper gold targets across its 7,000 square kilometer land package, many of which have critically never been drill tested before. Inflection is very tightly held, with management and insiders owning 27% of the company, as well as strong institutional support from Crescott Capital and Resource Capital funds. Now, Claudia is representing Kodiak Copper, which is focused on copper exploration in North America in established mining districts with good infrastructure where mines can be permitted and built. The company is led by a team with a strong track record of creating over $2 billion of shareholder wealth. Kodiak was founded by Chairman Chris Taylor, the founder and CEO of Great Bear Resources. It's led by Claudia Tornquist, the former GM at Rio Tinto, and is a member of the Discovery Group. Kodiak's most advanced asset is the 100% owned MPD copper gold porphyry project, located in a producing mining district in the prolific Cresnel terrain in southern British Columbia. MPD is a district-scale, multi-centered porphyry system where Kodiak has made a high-grade discovery, the Gate Zone. Big follow-up drill programs expanded the Gate Zone to considerable size and successfully proved multiple further kilometer-scale mineralized zones across large 226 square kilometer land package. Kodiak has shown the ability to raise capital while protecting a tight share structure and attracting strategic investors such as Teck Resources. So, panelists, with that housekeeping behind us now, let's talk a bit about copper in general before we kind of drill down, pardon the pun. Copper's role in future technologies and the energy transition is undeniable. With the demand of copper projected to rise significantly in coming years, there's a major need for new copper discoveries and ultimately new producing mines. Can you give us your thoughts on the current copper landscape and the role exploration companies have for the future copper market? Claudia, why don't you start us off?
Yes, we're pleased to. Well, at the moment, at this time, the fundamentals for copper are really quite extraordinary. Strong demand, as you outlined, and very, very little supply on the horizon. The discovery pipeline is at an all-time low, And that's simply because in the last decade in particular, there weren't many discoveries. The curve of discoveries is really plunging quite steeply. And if you look at history in the 90s, where many of the mines that are producing now were discovered, there were single years where more copper was discovered than in the entire last decade. And for that reason, we are now at a point where there is just a very, very, very small amount of mines that are in development, projects that are being in development. And in particular, no big mines were discovered in the last 10 years. So we know already now, in the next 10 years, there won't be a new big mine built because it takes 20 years from discovery or more to production. And what hasn't been discovered now will not be producing in 10 years' time. So it's really quite an extraordinary situation. Lots of demand, very little supply, more discoveries needed.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct when you say there won't be mines coming on stream to meet this rising demand. Now, I look at the demand curve for copper, and I think it's the steepest demand curve really of any commodity that we've seen in recent history, perhaps altogether in human history. And you talk about, I've bandied about the term that it takes about 10 years to get a copper mine into production, but you're absolutely correct. From discovery to production, it can take 20 to 25 years. So it's a matter of, with this steep demand curve that we have coming up, that every large project out there that's already known will have to be developed to meet that demand, but they won't be developed. And part of that is because of political considerations, et cetera. Both of your companies are fortunate to be operating with their main discoveries and projects in optimum exploration and mining districts, very mining friendly districts. So that risk aspect is dramatically reduced, if not eliminated entirely. Alistair, what are your views on the copper market and that kind of a supply response to the demand curve that we see coming up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the fundamentals which you've just outlined there, really, there's no denying the demand for copper and whatnot. But really, we're still not seeing a really significant step change in the amount of capital being deployed into copper exploration. And I would say that's even true with the major mining companies. I don't think there's been a really material jump in funds deployed for exploration over time. And I'd say that's definitely the case for junior explorers. I mean, if you look at the percentage of juniors that are out there looking for copper, there's relatively few compared to the companies out looking for gold and lithium and whatnot. So I think really there's a real gap in our industry. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for the smaller companies like Kodiak and Inflection to fill that gap, because really it's developing big concepts to fill that pipeline that Claudia mentioned. There's not that many groups generating new concepts and ultimately in jurisdictions where the major mining companies want to own their assets in the long term. So there's a real gap, and I think it's something that we as an industry have to address, and including the major mining companies. There is more of a push into copper. Even the traditional gold mining companies, most of them are exploring for copper right now. But I think there's still we could still do a lot more as an industry as a whole to generate new targets and come with new concepts. Because as you mentioned earlier, the timelines from discovery to production are astronomical. So we have to do better as an industry.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that some of the big gold companies like Barrick, I think, is the prime example, are really moving into copper. Do you all feel like because both of your companies have been fortunate enough to attract investment by major mining companies, is this market kind of bifurcated into haves and have-nots, kind of like the gold market is as well?
It feels that way. Certainly, if you've got a source of capital from a major mining company, it definitely makes life easier at this time. I mean, it's obviously the capital markets are challenging, and I just don't think there's enough capital being deployed into the sector right now.
But you certainly see a lot of majors now investing in juniors. In fact, is Kodiak's largest shareholder, and other major companies also taking stakes. And yeah, they see that a lot of new projects are needed, and are trying to get a toehold in the junior companies. And that's very typical in the industry. You see the juniors doing all the exploration, most of the exploration, majors waiting and looking. And once a project is de-risked, then you can have a certain visibility to a certain size, then the majors step in and acquire it.
Yeah, and in that kind of an environment, well, first off, you're both very fortunate to be among the haves here. We should get that clear, and well funded for your exploration efforts going forward. And we're going to get into technologies, and both of your companies are doing some really innovative things on the technology front for exploration. But what else do juniors have to do differently? I know Kodiak has assimilated or brought together a lot of disparate land packages and created a very large cohesive package that's being explored as one for the first time. And Alistair, your Inflection is really doing a drill and kill because your land package is so large. You're doing a drill and kill approach that preserves funds and really gets to the heart of trying to find the next big deposit. So before we get into the technology, let's talk about what both of you are doing different that's separating you from the pack.
Well, I would say in general, the low-hanging fruit have gone. Exploration is much harder now, and finding a deposit than it was, say, 50 years ago, where you still had big deposits on surface with whatever, 1% of copper. Those low-hanging fruits are not there anymore. So really, you have to do something different and take a new approach or new approaches. In Kodiak's case, as you said, we have consolidated a number of previously drilled projects, and have then taken a different approach. That's really Chris Taylor, our chairman, who sort of looked at what was done previously, which was all very shallow drilling, and then had a different interpretation of the system. And we drilled deeper and were able to intercept much higher grades than the previous explorers had. And obviously also had the benefit of being able to just look at the big picture, because a porphyry, a large system, you need a large consolidated land package to really put a comprehensive exploration strategy in place. So yeah, with some new thinking and a different approach, that's really what led to our discovery.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think, the sort of new approach is required, and, what we call new search-based. I think we just need to look in areas that haven't been really explored before. I mean, it's a very simple concept in many ways, but really looking for new areas that haven't previously been considered, get away from some of the same old projects and things like this. But really, one of the big shifts for me is people need to start thinking about going undercover. The major mining companies have really embraced this. And, you'll see a lot of the big copper gold exploration companies that are chasing targets undercover. And one of the big shifts is the embracing the block cave technology. And where this is where essentially these potential ore bodies are exploited from below. But ultimately, these underground massive block cave operations are beneficial in many ways, and they're socially a little bit more acceptable these days, and we're all very mindful of these challenges the industry has as a whole. But ultimately, that big shift underground, testing extensions of known belts where it disappears undercover, or completely new search bases altogether, going into jurisdictions that perhaps we haven't considered before. these sort of things. So we really need to think a little bit outside the box and get away from drilling the same old projects, in my opinion. And that's probably the big one. New search bases. Think outside the box.
That brings up a few things I think we should consider here. When you're looking for copper deposits, you're looking for really large deposits, large porphyries typically. So you're talking about great capital expense. So a junior finds that they're going to have a major partner at some point. You're also looking at projects that go deep, if they are large. And so that brings up mining expense, and that brings up grades. Now, historically, it's taken higher grades to bring in that kind of block caving capability to go deep. But now what we're talking about is an environment where the copper price, in my view at least, over the next 4 years or so, is very likely to double. I mean, if you look at the copper supply deficit that's going to grow in the years just ahead. I forget which one of your companies, but one of your presentations has a great chart that shows that line going down over time, the deficit growing larger and larger and getting significantly so over just the next few years ahead. That means much higher copper prices. That means companies can afford to go deep. They can afford to block cave. That means projects like that were lower grade before are now going to suddenly become economic. I've noticed that happening in some of the large gold deposits really over just the last couple of months. We're talking about numbers that seemed fantastic literally last year, and now they're there for gold. I think they're going to be there for copper in relatively short order. So how are you looking to explore for that new world of copper where you have much higher copper prices, where you can go underground? Claudia, I know that you're in British Columbia, which is known for really large copper deposits that are typically lower grade, but they're very large and they're economic because of the infrastructure. How is that benefiting you? And what do you see for similar projects in the future just ahead?
When you highlight an important point, firstly, grades are going down. And when you're looking at grades, it's always important to look at the other side of the medal, the cost side as well. You have jurisdictions like, for example, British Columbia, where grades are typically lower, but costs are very low too, because infrastructure is there and because of the other characteristics. And so all in all, even though grades are low, you end up with profitable mines. And conversely, you have other jurisdictions, for example, the Andes in South America, where you have spectacular high grades, but costs are very high as well. You are up at altitude, hundreds of kilometers from water, electricity, roads, etc. So when looking at opportunities, it's always important to take both sides into equation. And yeah, the reason Kodiak is in British Columbia is simply that we like a safe and secure jurisdiction, but the fact that there are several producing mines around us, that just gives a lot of confidence that this is an area where mines can be built and permitted. And also it just gives you a very good yardstick of what grades are needed to make a profitable mine.
So I guess one of the key aspects for an investor, if you're looking for a junior, you want one that's hunting in elephant country, as it were. Alistair, I think that probably applies to you pretty well, huh?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're exploring the northern extension of a belt that hosts some of Australia's biggest mines, and you mentioned it in your introduction there, the Kodiak operation. This is Newmont Mining's flagship operation. This is a cluster of porphyry, copper gold porphyries that are being exploited from underground as block caves. But yeah, this is a huge deposit, and there's a number of others there in the belt, and we're exploring the northern extension of this belt where it disappears under transported cover. But a little bit different than Claudia. You know, we are very much focused on high grade underground block caves, and you know these have their own unique challenges. You know, they're very expensive to build. You know, there's it's probably a several $1 billion to develop these big deposits from a greenfields concept all the way through to production. But the benefit of them, you know, once they're actually built, is their operating costs are relatively low, and it's really a lot of upfront capital. But as I say, once they're in production, you can get away with actually mining very relatively low grades as well. But typically, you need a sort of a higher grade sort of sweet spot to pay off that upfront capital as quickly as possible. But you know, the porphyries that are typically exploited from underground like that in the block caves are generally a little bit higher grade, and the really good ones typically have a gold credit as well. And you know, Kodiak there in New South Wales is a good example of that. And then there's ones like Red Chris in British Columbia as well, good gold credits as well. But yeah, it's always a function of economics and scale, and the stars need to align with a good copper price when you're developing these projects in the long term, because the timelines are incredible. You know, for us to make a discovery today, for example, it would take many years to get to the stage where you're actually developing, producing from one of these discoveries. So that's probably one of the big challenges the industry has as a whole, just the timelines in terms of developing these massive projects.
Yeah, but it's important for investors to realize that they're not going to be investing in a junior exploration company to go into production because time is money, and what a junior does is it brings those rewards forward, because you can dramatically increase the value in the share price of a junior company through a big discovery and a big deal along the way. And speaking of big deals, you know, we talk about the major mining companies and how much larger they are than the juniors, and we talk about the capital expenditures necessary, the billions of dollars. But in reality, you look at the even broader picture, these major mining companies are still dwarfed by some of the big tech companies out there that are absolutely desperate for metals. And copper, I think, is the one that nobody can innovate around. It's absolutely necessary. So we are actually seeing tech companies exploring, and original OEMs investing in companies in the battery metals and the base metals, et cetera, which brings a whole new aspect there. You're not looking at the few major mining companies to support or take out your company. You could actually be taken out by a Tesla, as it were. Have you seen that in? Well, I guess we can't get into any specific interests in your companies, but what are your thoughts on that new aspect? Because we've got, now we have AI also added to the whole electrification aspect for copper. So we are going to see more and more tech companies looking to get security of supply, and not just, well, supply at a good price, but actually secure their supplies going forward. What are your thoughts on that and how that's changing the face of the exploration industry?
Well, I think it's a positive. It's certainly a very interesting trend to see that you have now companies investing in commodities and in metals that weren't going there before. You mentioned the gold companies going into copper. That's one example. But yeah, for example, car companies and OEMs all of a sudden investing in metals. You wouldn't have seen that 5 or 10 years ago. It's an interesting trend, and from a junior perspective, it's a positive because, yeah, we've talked about that before. It's really the junior creates value at the drill bit, and eventually, a major company comes and likes what they see and takes out the junior, acquires the junior. That's our business model, and obviously, if there are more interested parties circling, that's a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the big one as well is we're seeing this sort of non-traditional sources of capital coming into our sector, which is obviously a very, very positive thing. You know, it's new groups. I mean, the one that springs to mind is a group called Cobalt, who's backed by some of the, you know, the higher profile investors, the Jeff Bezos and the Bill Gates as such, and groups out there that, you know, as Claudia mentioned, doing more of the AI type of initiatives, generating large concepts and large targets in different parts of the world, often with a focus on the battery metals, copper and nickel and things like this. But it's a very positive thing. But ultimately, you know, the AI and the technology gets to a certain point, and you still have to get out there and collect your own primary data where data doesn't exist. And this is my point a little bit earlier, go to new areas. So there's still challenges ahead with the AI sector as a whole, and there's probably a whole conversation around that in itself. But it's a very positive sign that just new capital from non-traditional sources is coming into the exploration space. And I guess the other thing that we've seen and had a little bit of exposure to is sort of some new technology around sort of geophysics as well, which we can get into as well. But there's a few developments on that front. There's a new technology called ANT out of ambient noise tomography, run by a group out of Australia. That's a very interesting new tech that's being deployed as well. So there's a few things, but for the most part, you know, it's really kind of a very traditional industry in many ways. It's boots on the ground to some degree, and I think if we're going to find new things, we've just got to deploy all the tools we possibly can, and that would include the AI and anything that we can layer on to help generate new targets that we can work up and ultimately drill.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a moment, but you both brought up some points that I think are very interesting. That the market really is changing, and some of these non-traditional sources are just throwing silly money around. We saw a lithium company not that long ago got a check written by a auto company for a multiple of its market cap, which is just absolutely astounding. And these companies really do need the metal, and they need the security of the supply. The big majors are analyzing projects in to 2 or 3 decimal places, where these other groups coming in, I don't want to say they're not that sophisticated, but I guess I'm going to say they're not that sophisticated. And they are really just coming in, and writing big checks and bringing big money to bear in the industry. So I think that's interesting. And the AI aspect is added on top of the electrification trend, which I think we can look at it. We look at this, the potential supply response of the copper industry and other metals, and we know that the electrification goals are not achievable currently. And now we have the need for AI data centers coming up. That's going to be almost as much demand added on top of that. So these goals aren't achievable, but yet if they get only a fraction of the way there, it's going to demand all of the copper projects that we know on planet, and some new ones that need to be found, which you are both doing and looking for them, and you're both using. This is another interesting, and I think serendipitous pairing of both of your companies in today's webinar is in that both of you are on the cutting edge of new technologies employed in exploration. Claudia, I know you're using AI and to great success. And unlike a lot of companies that find low-grade deposits and are then looking for higher grade, you were fortunate to find a really nice high-grade target in discovery right off the bat, and you're using AI to expand on that and find similar targets. And so why don't you tell us a bit about that, and then we're going to get into ANT and other geophysical surveys with Alistair following that.
We've started using AI for exploration this year. We're using Verify's AI engine, brand new out the gate. We were actually beta client of it. And it's another tool in the exploration toolkit, in addition to all the geophysics, geochemical, all the other methods we use. And it's been a very interesting experience. And I truly believe that AI will, over time, really increase the efficiency of our exploration work and bring down costs. We have a project with MPD, which is, I believe, ideally suited for AI because it's a project that has decades of historical exploration, so very, very data rich. Obviously, in addition to the historic exploration, we have now also drilled and explored for 4 years, 5 years now. So we have lots and lots of data. And what we did, or what the AI engine essentially does, is, like a human geologist, choose through all these different layers of data and looks for patterns, looks for areas where, say, there is a copper anomaly on surface, and then there's some geophysical anomaly underground, and several other data points line up, and that's then an area that is highly prospective. That's what a geologist does, but with just the sheer volume of data you have in an exploration project, there are limits to what a human brain can do. Like, we have in certain areas of our projects 40 different types of data. And as a human, you can maybe look for patterns in 4 or 5. You can't really look in 40. And so really what this AI engine does is it increases your ability to discover patterns, anomalies, and it was a very iterative process. So we put all our data into the AI engine. It spat out prospective areas. We looked at those, didn't quite look right. Then we looked at the data, something was missing, added more data, looked at it again. So very interactive. But what came out of it are essentially a couple of 9 new areas of interest on the project that we are now exploring on the ground. Those are areas we just simply haven't gotten around to yet with traditional methods. I mean, traditional methods is a prospector walking the ground, mapping, sampling, etc. And if you have a large project, in our case, 226 square kilometers, it just takes a while to cover the entire area. So you prioritize. And our AI work has been very efficient in identifying new areas of interest that we can now focus in on and explore more on the ground, do some sampling, do some geophysics, drill. So it was a very efficient process. Then we're now on the ground checking out all these AI-generated prospective areas, and we'll be reporting back fairly soon.
I encourage the viewers to go to your website and look at some of the maps you've been able to generate. It seems like the technique has been validated somewhat because AI identified areas that were in close proximity to your discoveries and maybe extensions to those, but also completely new areas. So I guess that had to be encouraging to you that it knows what it's looking for.
Yeah, that was the first piece of work, to actually look whether the system identified the areas where we know already there is copper, our discoveries, the zones that we've already drilled, and it did. And that gives a lot of confidence that the method works. And yeah, so we've now then looked in areas where we haven't looked yet, and that's where we discovered or identified the new areas of interest with AI.
Yeah, and I'm really impressed with the number of targets you have on the MPD project writ large, and that's another common thread between both of your companies is the number of targets you have. Alistair said you have a number of targets and you're working your way through them, but there are challenges there in that the reason you have this massive land position is because this extension to this legendary mining district is buried under cover. So how are you peering beneath that cover? How are you addressing that challenge?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a very significant challenge. There's a blanket of younger sedimentary rock sitting on top of the prospective geology that hosts these big deposits located further to the south. So it's always been, how do we look through this young transported sedimentary cover? And we've generated our principal targets using traditional airborne magnetic surveys and gravity surveys. And this has got us so far, and it's been quite successful. But we became aware through our partnership with AngloGold of a new technology called ambient noise tomography, or ANT. And this is a sort of a new, essentially a passive seismic technology which records minor movements in the Earth. The Earth is constantly flexing and moving, and there's a lot of man-made sort of noise as well, which are picked up. And this technology, it's really very cutting-edge stuff. They put these geodes, these sort of basketball-size pieces of equipment into the ground on a sort of grid-like fashion, and they're recording these movements in real time with their own proprietary satellites. It's fascinating stuff. I'd encourage any listeners to have a look at Fleet Space Technologies. It's an Australian group, and what they do, they just build a three-dimensional picture of the geology at depth, so we can map out exactly how thick the cover sequence is, for example, so we know how far we need to drill through the sediments. But more importantly, it gives us a three-dimensional view of the Earth, and what it measures is velocity, or relative velocity, in the bedrock. And we know in our case we're looking for porphyries that are generally quite vertically extensive, tubular-like form in terms of their geometry. And what this does, it maps out high and low velocity zones, and we're working through this right now. We've just completed a large regional survey across most of our portfolio, as well as more of a focused survey over one of our specific targets, where the early drilling has come back with very encouraging results. So it's a new technology, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this. And for me, from what I've seen of it, it looks like a significant step change and something new. And we, as an industry, we struggle to come up with new things to really, aid exploration. But this one in particular, this ANT technology, looks to be working very, very well. And I think we're just going to see more and more of it as time goes. And it's relatively quick to deploy, and you can have results in real time as well. But so far it looks very promising, and I think we're going to see more and more of this as time goes on.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. You were able to get results back very quickly, and if you look at the maps on your website, you can see how you're able to delineate these structures and make sense of previous geophysical work, et cetera. And it all seems to kind of come clear. And I have to tell you, it is cutting edge, because I've made myself look very smart by talking about this with some other companies that have literally never heard of it, looking for porphyries, et cetera, and have never heard of this technology. So it is the wave of the future, a way to peer below that cover. So I'd like to move into the Q&A part of our webinar today, and viewers can type in their questions into the chat box and/or the Q&A box, I believe. So please give us your questions. So let's go ahead and start. We have one for Alistair. Can you tell us more about the partnership with AngloGold for Inflection? Because that's really something I think most juniors would love to have, and is tremendous advantage. And that partnership has actually been accelerated on one of your targets. Let's try to get into that a little bit.
So it is very much a partnership. It's a joint venture, but we work very, very closely with AngloGold. They've come in and ultimately have an option on the majority of our portfolio, and it's a sort of a 4-stage agreement whereby right now they're spending 10 million Australian dollars doing that drill and kill type strategy you mentioned earlier on, where we're poking 2 to 3 holes into each of these geophysical targets we've generated, and we're sort of systematically drill testing. There's about 35 sort of major target centers comprising of multiple targets themselves, And we're in that sort of drill and kill stage. And so at the end of that stage, AngloGold then retains the right to earn all the way up to 75% in any of the targets. They can select up to 5 targets. They've already selected 1 before we've even finished that phase 1 drill and kill phase. But ultimately, phases 2 and 3, they were to get to 65% interest in each of the targets that have to spend $27 million on each of the targets to get to 65% interest. And then to get to 75% interest in each of the targets that have to deliver a pre-feasibility study with a minimum 2 million ounce measured indicated resource. And at that point, they also seed back to Inflection. Because we acquired this ground by essentially staking open ground, they would have to seed back to the company either a 1 or 2% net smelter return as well. So it's a very attractive deal for us. We're not deploying any of our own capital. And we also receive a 10% management fee for operating the joint venture, which more than covers our overhead costs and ultimately new business and a few other bits and pieces we're doing as well. But yeah, it has enabled us not to go back to the capital markets. Our treasury is about the same as what we were 18 months ago now. So we're very, very blessed to work with Anglo, and ultimately it is as a partnership, both on a financial aspect, but also on a technical level as well. We work very, very closely with their technical team on the ground. We can draw on their geophysical expertise, their geochemists and their geologists, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a wonderful partnership, and really looking forward to seeing how it progresses over the coming time.
Yeah, it really is. It's a lot of money with a good group, and it shows a commitment toward a project that will take some funds to explore, but the prize is worth it. Claudia, talking about where the prize is worth it, we have a question about the BC copper deposits in general and the grades of those deposits, which many people look as a disadvantage for the region. However, the number of big copper projects and mines in BC and the size of them would seem to belie that disadvantage. So how can these kinds of porphyry deposits in BC make a go of it?
Well, it works. There are a number of big and very profitable mines. Near our MPD project, we've got Highland Valley, which is Teck's large copper porphyry mine, has been producing for decades and will likely produce for many more decades. And 20 kilometers south is Copper Mountain. That's just been acquired by Hudbay. And both those mines, if you just look on a worldwide, are relatively low grade. To take Copper Mountain as an example, their reserve grade, the material they mine, is 0.23% copper with some gold byproduct, and the cutoff grade is 0.12% copper. So anything over 0.12% copper goes into the mill. And those grades, looking forward, will go down, not up. But if you look in BC, those mines are very profitable. And many companies acquired mines, projects, stakes of it. As I just mentioned, Hudbay paid over $500 million for our neighbors, Copper Mountain. There was Newmont, who acquired GT Gold. That's another porphyry exploration project that was also around about $500 million price tag. Newcrest invested in Red Chris, another porphyry mine. So certainly lots of interest. And yeah, that just speaks to the quality of the jurisdiction and that the economics work.
Yeah, and your Gate discovery, I mean, we talk about a lot of drilling that you've done at MPD and a lot of discoveries you've made, but Gate is something that really is relatively high grade for BC and is very significant in its own right. What give us an idea of just that discovery, the extent of that discovery?
Well, we were fortunate to drill into a nice big high-grade zone right at the start. We made the Gate discovery in our maiden drill program, and the highlight drill intercept at this zone was 535 meters of at the time 0.76% copper equivalent. So several times, 2 or 3 times the grade that is mined in the area. And we were able, with subsequent drilling, to extend the gate zone to 1 kilometer in length. We've drilled it down to almost 900 meters. So it's a big, high-grade, nice, continuous zone of mineralization. And that's important because at the porphyry, typically what you have is large amounts of lower grade mineralization and then one or several high grade centers. And those are very important for the economics. You need both. You need the volume and the lower grade, but you also need a high grade, one or several high grade zones. And we certainly have one with the gate zone. And we have other zones like the west zone where we've also drilled high grade, partly directly from surface. So yeah, that's certainly what we're hunting for because that will be ultimately very important for the economics.
Yeah, and we can't underestimate for the viewers the importance of those high-grade zones for the economics. It helps a project pay back the capital costs much more quickly and really makes the difference in many cases between a project that can be advanced and one that cannot. Alistair, we have some questions coming in, and one of them is, as a North American listed company, what made you choose to explore New South Wales? What was the attraction there? I think I could answer that one, but you go ahead.
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot. It was very much opportunity driven. It was really looking for the very best opportunity with a focus on mining friendly jurisdictions, and New South Wales is an excellent jurisdiction, but it was very much driven by the opportunity. There was a gentleman called Dr. Douglas Haynes, who's been seriously successful at finding big deposits, particularly in Australia. Is credited with the discovery of Olympic Dam, for example, one of the world's biggest mines. And he came up with this concept of exploring the northern extension of the belt. So it was, it was really driven by that opportunity and the gentleman that generated those targets. And it was a very, very compelling opportunity. He had just did a preliminary analysis of the regional magnetic survey, a survey that was flown by the government of New South Wales to encourage investment in mining and exploration. And he generated all of these massive targets that critically had never been drill tested before, which was just staggering to me. The fact that you'd have these huge features he considered analogous with these big deposits further to the south that had never been drilled. I mean, this is 2 hours up a paved highway from Australia's biggest gold mine. So that was the real opportunity. It was the jurisdiction, the technical rationale, and the fact that these huge targets along trend had just never been drilled before, and very, very exciting to do this. And they were on open ground as well. Critically, that was the key piece. Really, in many ways, we're able to secure this huge 7,000 square kilometer piece of ground without having to do any third-party deals with underlying royalties and things like this. So it was all about the opportunity.
So, Claudia, we've talked a bit about the challenges that junior mining explorers have in the copper space. What about investors? What are their what challenges does the current market present to investors in the junior copper space? I guess some of those revolve around the challenges to the mining companies themselves in terms of finding money, good projects, et cetera. But from an investor standpoint, what should they be looking for, and what are the difficulties they face in finding a good junior copper investment?
Well, in my mind, this time presents much more opportunities than challenges from an investor's perspective, because really we've been now in a downturn for almost 2 years, and across the board, share prices are just really beaten down, and companies are showing very low valuations, even those that are successful. So lots of opportunities, particularly because the copper price has turned, is now over $4, has really performed well this year. All the large companies are seeing big increases in their share prices, but that hasn't filtered to the juniors yet. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. And what I think is important from an investor's perspective to look for as well. The team is obviously key, but also those companies who were able to really do well through the downturn, because a lot of companies have not done much work because it was very hard to raise the capital. So companies were unable to raise capital, didn't explore much, didn't really move their projects forward. And that's obviously then if you have a company like Kodiak, who's done big drill programs over the last couple of years, we are now ready with good results as and when the market turns. And then what comes into that as well is just the ability of the company, the team, to keep dilution in check. I mean, that's also a risk in a downturn, that companies just get horribly diluted because it's so expensive to raise the capital. And being able to maintain a tight share structure, that would also be something I'd be looking for as an investor.
Yeah, I would add to that, what I tell people or investors and my readers is that the copper play as it is right now is something where the market is presenting such a huge tailwind. Again, the most dynamic and compelling supply-demand scenario that I think we've seen for any base metals for sure for decades, if not ever. So it really is kind of a set it and forget it investment opportunity. And it is a tremendous opportunity. If you find the juniors who have great management teams, great advisory and technical teams, and the ability to be one of the haves in this market, to actually raise money in this market, especially in a non-dilutive fashion, then, set it and forget it, invest in some of these better companies, and then wait a few years, and you should be very pleased with what you did, because I do think that the copper market is going to get extremely helpful to all of these plays over the next couple of years. Alistair, I have a couple of questions directed toward you, and I'm going to combine them. One is, how are you able to generate drill targets below the blanket of sedimentary cover? And another one is, when will shareholders get an update disclosing the very encouraging drill results? That's in quotes, so I guess you said that somewhere. That Alistair described from using ANT on the Duck Creek target.
Yeah. So we generate the targets through a combination of all available information, which is fairly limited. As I mentioned, there's this regional airborne magnetic survey, so that's the primary tool we use, and then there's gravity data as well, which again is public domain information. Then we layer on our ANT data for the most part, which we've just collected as well, and any available historic drill data in the broad area, or any chronological data as well in that area as well. So it's just bringing everything together and really just developing that sort of pipeline of targets, which we've taken a very sort of disciplined and systematic approach to drill testing. So it's a combination of those things. And then as we drill holes, our sort of model generally evolves. We might decide a certain segment of the interpreted belt is not as prospective as we initially interpreted, or vice versa. So we're constantly tweaking that model as we go. And we've got this beautiful proprietary data now, just over that whole sort of 300 kilometers of the belt, which we're exploring. And then in terms of sort of updates, I mean, obviously the drilling's ongoing. We've just completed our ANT survey as well, and that data is being processed. We just announced the completion of the survey, so there should be some updates about that shortly as well. But this is a large scale ANT survey completed over about 1,800 square kilometers. So very large scale. We're looking for big structures, big sort of intrusive centers, not necessarily a pinpoint on a map where we're going to drill a hole. The next steps would likely to be do some more infill ANT to get to really locate those specific drill holes and things. But it's an ongoing process, and as you just mentioned, Brien, it's a longer term play. in terms of just being able to work up these targets and systematically work through them. So it's ongoing, and we're obviously thrilled to have Anglo Gold as a partner to fund these things as we move along.
Claudia, a couple of questions that I'm going to combine for you as well. What do you believe is the most important ingredient to be a successful junior copper explorer? And also an update on your exploration efforts in this season.
Okay, well, most important ingredient that makes me think of my time earlier in my career when I was in venture capital. And when we looked at investment opportunities, the first thing we looked at was the team. And I would very much argue the same for an exploration company. Of course, the project is important, but if you don't have the right team in place, it's very easy to mess up a good project and not bring it to fruition. And so what I would look for as an investor would always be the quality and the track record of the team. And at Kodiak, I feel very fortunate to be working with Chris Taylor, who is just off a big success with Great Bear. He's leading our technical work and is very much an out-of-the-box thinking geologist. That's what led to Great Bear's success and $2 billion for shareholders. Just him and his partner just interpreting a project differently than anyone else before. And that really is also what led to Kodiak's discovery. And yeah, so I would say the team is the single most important thing I would be looking for in a junior. And now I forget what the second part of your question was, Brien.
An update on what Kodiak is doing this exploration season.
Oh yeah, we've have a big exploration program underway. Started drilling earlier in the summer, 10,000 meters of drilling and lots of sampling, geophysics, regional exploration as well. And 2 drill rigs going as we speak. And first results we're expecting later in the summer, so August, September time, and then results throughout the autumn, winter, and into next year. So yeah, looking forward to report back relatively soon with the first results.
Well, wonderful. Thank you both for joining us today. We were aiming to get right about an hour on this webinar, and I think we could go on, but I'd like to try and kind of wrap up the whole story here. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And again, in my view, this opportunity for junior copper explorers is something really extraordinary. We have, in my view, in Gold Newsletter, we cover the story for gold and silver and the monetary metals. Right alongside and running in parallel, I think is an equally compelling, if not more so, story for base metals, for energy metals, for battery metals, and the one metal that you can't get away from in all of that, you cannot use technology to try and innovate around, is copper. It's involved in everything. It takes a lot of it, and it's not just the end users, but also the electrical grid to deliver all of this new energy that the world is going to be demanding. So it is perhaps the most sure macro story out there for any commodity. And if you find good junior companies that are well-funded, have great projects like the two with us today, and also have great management and technical teams, I can tell you that both of these companies have teams behind them that read like a who's who of the mining industry, that are peppered of names that will be in the Mining Hall of Fame. So I'd encourage you to look at both companies to learn more about those and in their news flow that's going to be continuing over the months to come. So lots of news. If you're interested in learning more about Kodiak Copper or the Discovery Group, please reach out to Rita Bennett. And if you're interested in learning more about Inflection Resources or Newquest Capital, please reach out to Brennan Zerb. I am very bullish on both of these groups. A lot of friends of mine and a lot of successes in both companies. We follow them very closely in Gold Newsletter. And I'll get in a plug for that, goldnewsletter.com. If you want information on investing in junior mining companies, we have a great free report. And please come to the New Orleans Investment Conference this fall, and you can go to neworleansconference.com to learn more about that. Claudia and Alistair, thank you so much today. It's been a great midsummer catch up on the copper market and two great junior copper explorers. I really appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate everyone for listening in today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.